and one facing the problem head-on by Hydesgrain. The more she spoke, the more sense it made to Dahlia as she began to smile lightly, forgetting that her disciple's situation was exactly what she described. She just continued to speak without looking at Shane and Jason, who looked at her with a complicated expression. To summarize what I said in context to our small issue, Jason seems to reach his vessel's limit soon. If his soul bonds continue to become stronger at that pace. More problematic is, however, that you can't really increase your mana core rank as fast as Artemis and Scorpio become stronger thanks to your large mana core size. Trying to think of a solution, Dahlia pondered for a long time, only to look into Jason's golden eyes that shimmered brightly, showing his uncertainty. If your soul world wouldn't be that large, allowing you to bind several dozen more soul bonds, this would be less of an issue, and I would just tell you to focus on your current soul bonds. Once Scorpio reaches his racial limit, it would be much easier for you to slowly change the tides by focusing on strengthening your physique with the Netherworld's Fort technique. At the same time, you could absorb mana and increase your mana core rank. Both absorbing mana and refining your body would strengthen and enlarge your vessel by a large margin, allowing you to bind another soul bond, somewhere in the future, if Artemis' increase in strength does not accelerate further. However, your soul world is too great to waste it just like that, which is the main issue. Dahlia sighed deeply and finished speaking before he started to enter her own world of thoughts, trying to figure out a solution, while Shane and Jason did the same. So I'm already in a problematic state because I can feel pain and my vessel can barely bear it. Maybe I can barely reach the 3rd or 4th master rank with my soul world's amplification before exploding or dying because of the pain, which will only worsen. Is that what Dahlia meant? Suddenly Shane shook Jason's body weakly because he was in his own world. As Shane said firmly, you shouldn't think about getting a new soul bond, and it would be better if you decrease your soul bond's food's quality and quantity so that their maturity process will take as long as possible. Didn't you say that both of them should be close to reaching the threshold to be eligible to compress their first mana drop? Tell them that they're not allowed to do so. Otherwise, with the vast difference between an unblemished and magical ranked beast's strength, you'll certainly die. Your soul world's amplification is much higher than most youths, probably several times that, and you shouldn't underestimate the problem you'll have to face. Hearing the urgency in Shane's voice, Jason could only nod his head. He was already aware that he had to face some problems, but thinking that all of them originated from his soul world's high amplification was hilarious. In the beginning, the amplification of 33% he received saved him more often than he wanted to acknowledge, and now it was his doom and biggest issue. When Artemis and Scorpio heard, "Decrease your soul bond's food's quality and quantity," they were immediately shocked because they could comprehend what this meant. Both were about to go rampage, only to hear Shane's last words, "You'll die," which immediately replaced their anger with worry and confusion. Transmitting these emotions to Jason, he was glad to have established a fortified soul conjunction, as it made everything much easier for him. Explaining the whole scenario as simply as possible without hiding anything important, Jason and his masters could see Artemis and Scorpio's shock visibly. Artemis screeched out in shock and fluttered violently with her wings, while Scorpio's sounds were similar yet at a higher frequency as his whole 3.5-meter-long body rattled. Over the last 3 months, both of his soul bonds not only became stronger but also larger. Artemis' length increased to 1.8 meters with a wingspan of 5 meters if she didn't adjust her size to a length of 1 meter and a wingspan of 3.4 meters, which she was able to do since evolving, while Scorpio's body length increased to roughly 3.5 meters. His width was not much, it was more than 2 meters, and he could barely fit inside the small house Shane and Dahlia bought. Scorpio was always forced to enter Jason's soul world when they were to enter or leave a room before he could leave once again to appear next to Jason once again. This was annoying, but still better than isolating Scorpio, which would give Artemis a reason to ridicule him even more. They were still rivals to gain Jason's attention, but knowing that they were also somehow the cause for Jason to feel so much pain, which they perceived through their fortified soul conjunction, caused them to behave without creating a ruckus. Without any issue, the two accepted Shane's word without even thinking about it as long as it would help Jason to feel less pain. Seeing this, Jason was thankful that his soul bonds were considerate, otherwise, if they wouldn't listen it would backfire and they would end up injured just like he did, which was not something either of them wanted to do. It was good that it was easy to convince his soul bonds to change their eating habit, which allowed Jason to give less high-quality food with much mana in it to Scorpio and incomplete mana cores to Artemis. In the end, they were unable to enter the magical rank without trying to compress mana drops, which would take lots of effort and time. With this in mind, Jason would have enough time to find a way to solve his current issue. There might be multiple solutions for his problem, but he had to find the most efficient one which wouldn't turn into another burden later on. However, this was easier said than done because Jason could only think of one short-term solution after thinking about it for a long time. And even with this one solution in his mind, Jason was unable to say how soon he might be able to achieve this. While Dahlia and Shane already discussed all kinds of solution, he also heard Dahlia saying the same thing he had in mind. If Jason is able to evolve his Black Origin Flame, his physique and mana core will be cleansed from impurities and enhanced. This enhancement doesn't come from the soul world amplification and changes the physique itself, which should strengthen Jason's body. Averting her attention to Jason, she asked, "Do you know if your body refining includes the first baptism you received?" It should be because the baptism strengthens your body and mana core while cleansing it from impurities. Because he was still in the earlier initial phase of the Netherworld's fourth body refining technique, Jason couldn't really prove if Dahlia's words were true, but he was sure that his Black Origin Flame's baptism was different from his soul world's amplification. Dahlia probably felt the same from her own experience, and she would know better than anyone else if the Origin Flame enhanced her body and mana core directly or if it was the same amplification one received from a normal soul bond, because she already underwent multiple baptisms. Meanwhile, he only received one baptism and Shane never received one, which was probably the reason for him to be so skeptical. It should, but I can't say for sure. Either way, this is the only solution I can think of right now. Other than that, I have really no idea how I might be able to solve the issue with my vessel without receiving any disadvantages. However, there is still the problem that I don't know what other requirements my Origin Flame needs to evolve, which is the only issue with this solution. I wouldn't even care if my soul world's amplification was much lower if it would allow me to bind multiple more soul bonds. Dahlia nodded when Jason said these words and added, "At least we now have a rough idea of how we can fix your problem to a certain extent without creating more trouble. If your soul bonds don't break into the magical rank accidentally, which is not really possible, and we search for a solution while you diligently absorb mana and refine your body, everything should be fine." Knowing that his master tried to reassure him, Jason was thankful to Dahlia, even if it was not really extremely helpful because he was still worried. Suddenly, Dahlia and Jason heard Shane, who was deep in his own world, mumbling. Lower soul world amplification. What about a curse? Chapter 302 Solution. Curse. By Hydesgrain. Lower soul world amplification. What about a curse? Both Jason and Dahlia were not sure if they heard what Shane said correctly because it seemed extremely weird. The room turned quiet again, and only when Shane noticed this, he looked up only to look into two dumbfounded faces. A curse? Dahlia asked, frowning. She already heard a few things about curses and knew a little bit about it, but curses mostly focused on cursing one's mana core, body, the environment, or something similar to that. However, after hearing Shane's next words, Dahlia knew that he implied something different. Scratching the back of his head, Shane could only say what was on his mind. As you two may know, my soul bond, the Bane of the Thousand Eyes Wolf, is a cursed wolf, and through this, I was forced to research more about curses to prevent that it would curse anyone except my targets. It might be difficult to cope with, but a curse to lower one's soul world amplification should exist somewhere. There are all kinds of curses we don't know about, and I doubt that something like this doesn't exist. Dahlia couldn't help but lift her eyebrow at Shane's words because it seemed ridiculous to curse oneself to lower one's soul world amplification as she averted her gaze towards Jason. Jason's eyes shimmered brightly and his lips curled upwards when he said, "A curse to lower my soul world amplification would probably be the best to solve my issue regarding the high transferred strength from my Artemis and Scorpio. This would also allow me to strengthen my vessel at a faster pace and bind more soul bonds without the fear of breaking apart. But there are also a few issues regarding this solution." Blinking several times, Dahlia began to ask herself if the two men in front of her were sincere with their opinion towards curses when she heard Jason's next words. "There are two issues with curses I can see right now. The first one would be that I don't know how to receive a curse, and the second would be the question about how I can determine what area I want to have curses, or in my case how I can only curse my soul world cause high amplification. I know that it might only be a thoughtless idea, but it's worth a try as long as we can be certain about the two issues with curses. Fortunately, I have more than enough time left because my soul bonds won't become much stronger anymore without breaking into the Magus rank, or rather enter the Lick state by compressing their mana into the first mana drop. By absorbing mana and breaking through the next levels, I might as well enlarge my vessel and strengthen it once again by refining my body in accordance with my mana core rank." Sighing, Dahlia was glad that Jason didn't completely lose his mind, and that he was still thinking more rationally, while her own husband, Shane's thoughts seemed to go down the completely wrong path. He was still deep in thought as he took out a large book from the new quantum bracelet he acquired in Terebrine. In the end, getting a new quantum bracelet was not difficult because one could just purchase one. However, more problematic was the creation of a new ID if one lost his quantum bracelet and memory at the same time. If nobody searched for this individual with amnesia, the government would issue a temporary ID to get citizenship on the island, or even Canir, where it was also possible for something like this to occur. There was always the possibility to lose memories after being injured by a powerful beast or even manipulated, which was why everyone would be tested after one stated to have amnesia. Shane and Dahlia acted like they had amnesia and entered the B-grade city they were currently inside, with Shane's heavy injuries and Dahlia's haggard appearance to show that something major happened to them. Their mana fluctuation revealed that they were stronger than a normal citizen and they could apply for citizenship without issue after making up a story that they defeated a Guardian-ranked beast and that they sustained their heavy injuries through that. In the end, they lost their memories and their quantum bracelets broke, which allowed the government to think that their story was true and that it had to be a strong Guardian-ranked beast with an ability that is based on one's mentality. As such, it was not problematic for them to receive temporary citizenship, only for Jason to enter a different city, to make it less suspicious as he had the same issue as his masters. Making up a story that he ran away from an unblemished beast with a mental affinity, his acting skills allowed him to receive citizenship faster than anyone. Now his name was Jason Laria, while Shane and Dahlia's family was now Bayer. It would only be temporary until they claimed to have regained their memory in order to receive their old identity back, but until that happened, a long time might as well pass. As such, the three remained rather low-key and Shane took Jason over to the B-grade city, where they purchased a house with the temporary citizenship once everything was cleared. Money and strength could give one everything within cities, and Jason's masters had both of those, which was the sole reason to allow him to purchase a house without permanent citizenship or ID. Now that Shane sat on a chair in front of Dahlia and Jason with a thick and old-looking book in his hand, Jason couldn't help but feel a little bit excited because he hoped that his master would find a perfect curse for him, which sounded stupid and weird to himself. However, thinking about a curse, his question still remained, and he looked at Dahlia, who was also looking at Shane but with a rather complex expression, as he asked, "Dahlia, can you explain to me everything about curses, because I don't really know much about them? In the Vanguard school, something like that was never a topic, and I've only read it one time in one of the books I received from you." Being able to distract herself from Shane, who acted like he was searching for something grand even though he wanted to curse his own disciple, Dahlia couldn't be more than happy as she turned towards Jason to answer his question. To be honest, mankind doesn't know much about curses, and I can't really say for sure that everything we know is true, which you can probably already estimate. Just think about our wrong cultivation system, the existence of an unknown number of more planets just like Argos, and the difference in our knowledge about the foreign races. However, according to our knowledge and what we found out until now, there are all kinds of beasts, plants, and even inanimate materials that harbor curses and even blessings. While curses have an evil nature and try to create destruction, horror, and all kinds of negative emotions and scenarios, blessings are the complete opposite because they're innately good and helpful for mankind to have. Blessed or cursed inanimate materials are said to be less powerful than living beings, but we don't know if that is really true. Nevertheless, there are many legends about blessed beings and how powerful one became by forming a soul contract with one, which even included a strengthened mana core, higher mana absorption rate, and much more. However, such beings are extremely rare, and Shane took several decades to find a guardian-ranked cursed wolf even if he could have bound a lord-rank beast at that time. Because he is stubborn and wanted to experiment with something, he was adamant in binding the Bane of 1,000 Eyes wolf, which was in the end not a bad decision even if it could have transferred the curse towards Shane. Glaring at Shane for a moment, she cleared her throat to start once again, back to the main topic. You probably know that we can inherit a beast's affinity, and there is also a low chance to inherit an ability from the contracted soul bond if it possesses one. The same applies to curses and blessings, which is the reason for everyone to search for blessed animate beings. Other than that, it is also possible for cursed beings to forcefully curse others even if it's less powerful than an inherited curse one receives through a soul connection, and the same applies for blessings. Chapter 303 Focus by Hydesgrain. Jason only nodded his head after hearing Dahlia's words, and even if he was slightly confused, everything was much easier to understand than before. So to put it simple, a curse is just a negative ability or effect or received through a cursed beast. The potency of a cursed soul bond is also much stronger as it would be if a normal, cursed being curses me. It's like the cursed being gives me a part of the curse, and with the cursed soul bond I receive the whole curse. Smiling lightly, Dahlia nodded as she said, that's roughly it, and there are only a few exceptions where cursed soul bonds beings don't share their curse with their master. Shane is one of them, and the curse on his Bane of 1,000 Eyes wolf is probably the reason. Not only has the wolf literally thousands of eyes, but they also have the ability to kill lower-ranked beings by simply looking into each other's eyes if this is desired. As such, Shane's soulbond's curse only changed its body structure and eyes ability. To put it simply, one might even say that the Bane of 1,000 Eyes wolf is only a sewered cursed being because it has no negative effects or misfortune lingering around, which it could transfer to Shane. Halting for a moment, Dahlia pondered how to put it as she explained, in the end, you would need a true cursed being, and it would probably be the best if you bind it as your soul bond in order to receive the strengthened curse. Otherwise, if you find the perfect curse and receive it without binding the cursed being, the curse will only be temporary, which might backfire in your circumstances. Only now did Jason realize that there were still many things he didn't know which even humanity was aware of. Searching for a cursed beast and binding it, which only lowered his soul world's amplification, would be perfect, but how high were the chances for something like this to exist? Furthermore, binding a cursed being was extremely dangerous, and there were too many uncertain factors one had to think of. The only positive aspect was that other humans might have encountered cursed beasts and wrote something about it in an online thread. Such forum threads were either about them bragging to have defeated such a being, that they survived an ambush, or maybe even to warn others about the terrifying curse the cursed being they found harbored. As such, it might be possible for them to find out something in a shorter time than they expected. However, Jason would still try to enlarge and strengthen his vessel before trying his luck with a curse that might bring him more disadvantages than benefits if he were to make a single mistake. Right now, he was not only responsible for his own life, but also Artemis, Scorpios, and even the Black Origin Flames, who seemed to become more like a living being with time passing. Thus, he couldn't act recklessly and allow his soul bonds to be endangered through a curse. It would have been something else for Jason if he were to be alone, but that was not the case. With this in mind, he stood up to receive his master's attention before he made his stance clear. I think a curse might be a good second option if enlarging and strengthening my vessel doesn't work, but I don't want to be responsible for injuring my soul bonds which they could receive through the curse. With this in mind, I would only form a soul contract with a cursed being once I know more about the curse it harbors and that it won't cause any problems to my soul bonds. Seeing how firm Jason was with his decision, Shane and Dahlia couldn't help but smile because it was the only right decision to take instead of acting rashly as he did before when he entered the 4-star rift. Suddenly Shane felt weird with the book about curses in his hand while he was already pondering if he should search for curses online too. Why was I so expectant? He suddenly asked himself before he shook his head. Clearing his throat, Shane wanted to say something to be distracted from his embarrassing behavior. That's a good decision, and in my opinion, it should definitely take a long time until you might even be able to find clues about a cursed being that suits your needs. There might be a few cursed beings that curse someone and create a weakened state, but this might as well come from several other reasons instead of a decreased soul world amplification. For instance, it could be a curse, slowing down one's mana output, circulation, sensitivity, or much more. As such, I will start investigating thoroughly and tell you once I know more. However, I'm sure that you will need a suitable cursed being to live freely, without the fear of breaking apart any moment because of your vessel. As for you, it would be good if you can continue increasing your soul energy while absorbing mana and refining your body. Most cursed beings are at least magical ranked beasts, more likely even at the guardian rank. Even if the latter wouldn't be the best for you, it's still better than a Lord stage cursed beast or even worse. If it's the worst, we can just dig our own grave because I'm not strong enough to defeat a cursed monarch ranked being. Even a Lord rank cursed being with a powerful curse might be difficult to defeat, even less catch. And then you would need to have enough soul energy to bind it, which would take a long time. Fortunately, your soul energy replenishing process is quite fast and it wouldn't take years for you to reach the required soul energy. However, the things I stated are only the worst possible outcome, and the most fortunate would be a cursed cub or low-ranked plant. Either way, don't think too much about it and let me take care of it, alright? Just focus on your body refining and mana core rank. Nodding his head, Jason wanted to do exactly what Shane told him and focus on the other things he had to take care of. Right now, the pain within him was still endurable and not even comparable to the Heaven's Hell Technique's pain, even less the devilish Valkyrie shield fruit he had to eat in order to survive refining his mind and splitting it afterward. He only had to be more careful if the pain would increase. One major goal he wanted to achieve this year was reaching the combat prowess of a low-lig state, but that was not everything. Currently, Jason had to waste way too much time practicing the Heaven's Hell technique every day, and he wanted to change this issue this year, the sooner the better. Only thinking that a single sitting took more than 3 hours was already a horrifying thought, and with this in mind, Jason wanted to change something substantially. After testing several things with his sub-area within his mind, Jason figured out that he was already ready to establish his second sub-area as long as he had enough resources and something protecting his brain from the possibility of being damaged. This would cost a fortune, and Jason was way too poor to start right off the bat. Unfortunately, his masters already told him that they wouldn't support another suicide act like they already did when he ventured inside the 4-star rift, telling him that he was responsible for himself if something bad were to happen. Jason knew that his masters only did so that he acted more independent and responsible, but his mind was already set on refining his brain once again to divide it and establish another small sub-area. He also tested out if it was better to create an endless cycle to strengthen his soul world core and obtain more soul energy in his first sub-area instead of continuously absorbing mana passively, and he figured out that the latter was slightly more efficient. From an endless soul energy cycle that used his high replenishing, Jason would receive a 1.5% increase in his soul energy in one day, which was comparable to slightly more than one sitting in the Heaven's Hell Technique's 3rd level. This was not something grand, but this endless soul energy cycle would be able to increase his soul energy units by 1.5% every day without lifting a single finger or having to practice the heavens hell technique, which would require more time the higher his soul energy became. However, his passive mana absorption was still slightly better in his current circumstances. The 3 hours he would save with the endless soul energy cycle inside his sub-area instead of the passive mana absorption cycle wouldn't be enough for him to receive mana in return if he were to absorb mana in this period. In the future, when the practice period for the Heavens Hell technique increased, it would be useful, but Jason hoped that he already established his second sub-area at that time. Now, he only needed an enormous fortune, which caused him to look at the mana grade 1 jadeite sword he forged only a few hours ago as his lips curled upwards. Chapter 304 Shop by Hydesgrain. There were a lot of things Jason wanted to do, but almost everything required lots of funds which he had to acquire first. It was only fortunate that his masters supported him until now with his body refining resources and a small amount of high-grade mana stones to help him while he consolidated his foundation with the 3 basic lifestyle occupations at the same time. Adding his expenses for food that were horrifyingly high until he explained to his soulbonds that it was better for them to eat less and lower mana-dense food to prevent him from breaking apart, he didn't have much star notes anymore. As such, his only high expenses, for now, were the body refining process because the required nutrition and mana couldn't be supplied by cheap products. Other than that, his mana absorption didn't necessarily need mana stones, only if he wanted to break through faster, which was exactly what he was supposed to do right now in order to enlarge and strengthen his vessel to accommodate stronger or even more soul bonds. Keeping that in mind, Jason was sure that his masters would still continue to support him. However, to make him independent, they also restricted their support line to a bare minimum, which prevented him from utilizing everything he could if he were to have enough resources. After his talk about the vessel and his issues, they offered to increase their support, only for Jason to reluctantly accept it to a certain degree. He didn't want to rely too much on his masters, and it was only because he feared that his body might tear apart that he accepted their offer. With an increased mana and nutrition supply, he would have more than enough resources to stay hidden inside their small house for several weeks if not months. But that was not what Jason wanted to do, because if he were to do that at his mana core rank, his combat prowess would decrease by a large margin thanks to his rusting martial art practice. It was already difficult for him to stay hidden for the last 3 months without going out to hunt beasts or do anything to perfectly adjust his body to his new strength, which was not good. Even if all of his combat techniques reached the perfect mastery, Jason was sure that his current combat experience and prowess were nothing special. Furthermore, after thinking about it for a while, he noticed that his soulbond's combat experience was either shallow or non-existent, which caused him to frown deeply. Artemis only fought next to him for the first few weeks before they departed to Syro City with a small detour through Giro City, and Scorpio didn't even have any combat experience, to begin with. He only monitored his master's fights through his eyes after their fortified soul conjunction was formed, and that was it. With this thought in mind, Jason could only estimate that his soulbonds had an extremely weak combat prowess, even if their mana core already reached the peak of the unblemished rank. It would already be considered a miracle if they were able to defeat late unblemished ranked beasts without any help, which caused him to frown, only by thinking about the possibility. If their combat experience was shallow, then it might even cause issues when Jason allowed them to occupy his mana core to use their body parts. Being able to use their manifested parts on his body, Jason couldn't help but feel restless, because it wouldn't need much to cause a big accident if they were to move instinctively during a fight, depriving him of control over their body parts. As such, Jason talked about this small problem with his masters, who told him that they already have a solution for this issue, that was not really one. However, before they wanted to initiate their plan, Shane and Dahlia told him that he should just take care of his own plan. He didn't plan anything special yet, but it was roughly 1 month ago when an idea formed in his head, which would allow him to earn funds without much difficulty. For this, he purchased a small shop inside the inner parts of the city and redesigned it completely, without caring about the expenses. His shop was only 100 square meters large and didn't look great in the beginning, only to change completely after he changed out the wallpaper and furniture to make it look more exquisite. There were also a few other shops inside the B-grade city they resided in, but if one were to compare their looks, Jason's small shop was only lacking in goods, employees, and a suitable name. Inside his spatial ring, there were several hundred perfect purified forged bars, grade 1 potions, and inscribing solutions he could sell. Other than that, there were also several dozen pseudo-mana grade 1 weapons and low grade 2 potions that were also perfectly purified. The purified forged bars alone should be enough of an attraction for potential customers because it was not easy for lower-ranked blacksmiths to produce something like this, while higher-ranked blacksmiths wouldn't even bother about forging perfectly purified grade 1 bar. They would immediately purify grade 2 bars and use them to create mana weapons, which was not the wrong path to earn profit. However, for low-ranked blacksmiths, it would be quite difficult to perfectly purify ores before they reached a certain threshold, which made such a thing unnecessary. Nevertheless, if such bars were found online, many low-ranked blacksmiths would flock around the shop that sold them, only to see if they might be able to learn something by inspecting such a bar. It was also highly likely for such blacksmiths to purchase purified bars to try breaking through the current shackles in their forging process, as it would be slightly less difficult that way. With this in mind, Jason was already confident to earn a lot as long as he could provide enough resources, while the other potions and inscription solutions he had would similarly attract customers. In the end, blacksmiths who came over to his shop for the purified bars would evidently notice the perfect purified potions, which would either cause them to purchase some for themselves or to start gossiping about his shop, which was the sort of he wanted. Right now, his stockpile was relatively large, but once it was used up, he would have to regulate everything, which was however not something he had to bother about right now. More importantly than that was that he also created an online shop, registered his shop under the name Golden Soul, which was something that jumped straight in his thoughts when he pondered about his shop's name. Additionally, he went to many different sites to look out for employees. Seeing that it was more difficult than he initially expected, Jason just created a request on all websites he found, which stated the salary he would give and his requirements. His salary was generous with 6,000 credits, which was 4 times that what normal employees earned inside a C-grade city, and Jason was sure that it was more than enough to attract a few employees. However, his requirements were quite harsh because he demanded a sole contract with a few clauses that prevented his employees from stealing from him, betraying him in any way, or having bias or prejudice against any customer. This was not something special in Jason's opinion, but he was still unsure if he might be able to get 3 employees, which was the number he found perfect for his small shop. It was not important if they were strong enough to throw a customer with ill intention out, because he also installed a protection system for his shop. Once everything was done, Jason couldn't help but look at his funds in shock because there were only 3-star notes from his initially 50 left behind. Chapter 305 She's My Employee by Hydesgrain. Now that he had to wait for someone to become his employee before he could open the Golden Soul shop, Jason couldn't help but feel satisfied with its appearance, even if it might be a little bit small compared to other shops. In his opinion, it was more important to have a high-quality shop that might be smaller than others than owning a large shop with low-quality items but a high quantity. Since he began concocting himself, his whole mindset about potions changed because he couldn't believe that he drank low-quality potions with many impurities inside them. It was disgusting to even think about the impurities he could see inside normal potions, which was only possible thanks to his increased mana core rank and the proportional strengthening of his eyes every breakthrough gave him. Jason didn't even want to know how many people had issues breaking into the Magus grade because they used too many potions. The thought was already enough to let him shiver lightly. Thankfully, he could purify potions perfectly now, and if he required help, Dahlia was there to help him out. She even showed him how to mass-produce potions, which was extremely difficult but quite helpful if he wanted to supply the shop without hiring someone else to provide more goods. Initially, Dahlia only demonstrated this technique to him, so that he could increase his proficiency in concocting without the need to jump from peak grade 1 potions to grade 2 potions, as the cost for the ingredients would increase by a large margin. Furthermore, the profit would be higher with a huge bulk of peak grade 1 potions than a few grade 2 potions, which was the most important reason to mass-produce lower-ranked potions. As such, with the technique she showed him, Jason would be able to increase his proficiency by a lot without the need to waste too many funds, which seemed to be one of the biggest issues her disciples had to face. At least, that was after seeing his expression every time he talked about credits and star notes. On the other side, she was still unable to understand Jason fully because he was adamant in earning his own fortune, which was the reason for him to reject most offers to give him an allowance and even more resources. While Dahlia was pressuring Jason to accept everything she gave him, Shane was rather reluctant in doing so because he was not only greedy and stingy, but it was also important to become independent and not a spoiled child. Under their current circumstances, it was unavoidable for Jason to require their support, but if they gave him too much, he might take it for granted, which was not something Shane wanted to support. As such, they had to find a compromise. The compromise they figured out was that they gave him a certain amount of resources that would help Jason to become stronger with an accelerated pace, but not enough to help him skyrocketed in his mana core rank and body refining. However, in the end, this compromise was also nullified when Shane and Dahlia heard about Jason's pain and the reason for it being his weak body and high soul world amplification. Even if they didn't want to spoil Jason, his life was more important, which both Shane and Dahlia agreed on without the need to even think about it. Both were still glad that Jason wanted to be able to achieve everything without their help, but it was more important to fix his issue, which all three of them knew. After accepting their proposal, Jason sat inside his still-closed shop, impatiently waiting to receive an answer from his jobs that were all over the different websites he visited before, as he decided to practice the Heaven's Hell technique to distract himself. 3 hours later, his soul energy increased by more than 160 units after a single sitting, which caused Jason to smile lightly, thinking about the first few months after his soul awakening, where it was already extremely difficult for him to receive one soul energy unit. Sighing deeply, it was as if several years passed since that time, even though it had only been 9 months. So much changed, and the most important to Jason was that he could finally see and that his peers couldn't trample on him as if he was an ant. Once he left his soul world, Artemis followed him, and only Scorpio had to stay back because of his large size of more than 3.5 meters in length. Jason was sorry for him, but only Artemis could adjust her size to a 1 meter long owl, even if she already grew to a size of 3 meters under normal circumstances. He didn't know how it worked, but it was definitely an advantage, and it would be stupid to complain about it. Suddenly, he heard a commotion outside the shop which attracted his attention. Looking through the window, he saw a small group of men riding on their canine soulbonds, pursuing a girl around his age, embracing something emerald green colored. However, what his mana eyes perceived was something completely different, which caused him to rush out of the shop as he summoned Scorpio without hesitation. Taking out the pitch-black mask he received from Shane several months, he put it on before he exerted his concealment technique to disguise his low mana core rank. From his mana eyes, he figured out that the canine soulbonds were at the mid-unblemished rank, while the small group of men pursuing the girl on the canine beasts were at the master rank. Seeing this, Jason was confident in defeating them with his soulbond's help, otherwise, he might be beaten up if he were to help. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't just help anyone who needed help if it could make his own life worse, but from the things he perceived through his mana eyes, there was not even the need to ponder whether to help or not, which was also the reason for him to act so fast. The girl who desperately ran away from the group of men was already crying because of her helpless situation when she saw something from the corner of her eye which ignited a small ray of hope within her. Meanwhile, Jason and Artemis used their ice affinity together to manifest a huge wall between the young girl and her pursuer, before he shouted, "Come here, fast." Hearing this, the young girl that was around Jason's age changed her direction without thinking much about possible dangers because her current situation couldn't become worse. She was only astonished to hear such a youthful voice from the black masked man with his two exotic-looking soul bonds behind. Artemis was currently in her large form and swung her wings to levitate in the air several meters above the ground where Scorpio with his equally large body was situated. They looked powerful and she sensed that the man behind the youthful voice was her only way out of her current situation without losing everything. Rushing towards Jason, Emily, the young girl already began to shout helplessly. "Please help me. I'll do everything you want if you can help me. Please." Quote. Seeing how desperate the young girl was, Jason figured out that the group of men he obstructed for a very short time were either behind the small emerald crystal she embraced or her body. With her long black hair, green eyes, long eyelashes, and slender body, she was definitely considered beautiful. However, what Jason was more interested in was the crystal inside her hands because his mana eyes saw something others might not be able to see without looking at it more intently. Nodding his head, Emily sighed in relief and thanked him multiple times. When she noticed that the small group of men who pursued her noticed her, the black masked man and his two exotic-looking soul bonds in front of her. Seeing this, they ordered their canine soul bonds to approach the black masked man carefully because they couldn't sense his mana fluctuations or mana core rank, which either indicated that he was a magus rank or had a concealment technique. In the end, either one would be bad, which was the reason for them to be more careful with the next steps, as their leader said. "Hello sir, the young girl behind you is my niece and ran away from home. We don't want to bother sir more than necessary and only need to take her back with us." Emily was trembling behind Jason, who also noticed this because she tucked his robe in fear that he would believe their words. Thinking about a good answer for a moment, he smiled behind his mask when he said, "How can that be true? She's my employee and never talked about such a weird-looking uncle." Chapter 306 Slave Market by Hydesgrain. Hearing what Jason said, the group of men on their canine soul bonds were astonished about his youthful voice, which told them that Jason was most likely not even at the magus rank. Additionally, they couldn't believe that Jason straight out lied to them about Emily being his employee. He seemed to hail from an influential family which was able to acquire a concealment technique, but his confidence when he lied was still somewhat baffling to them. They were sure of the fact that nobody cared about Emily because her family was already dead, while the orphanage she was sent to was not any better than trying to survive alone in a world after the mana breakout. Jason was also considered an orphan, but he never wanted to go to an orphanage because they would take away all remaining belongings of the deceased, leaving the orphan with nothing except the things they wore. When his mother died, he was often requested to go to the orphanage, which Jason always declined because he didn't need their hypocritical help, which was however the case for other youths that couldn't live independent at such a young age, whether it was because of fear, uncertainty, or that they were manipulated and lured over. The leader of the small group made 2 steps forward and summoned a longsword in his hand as he threatening said, "Don't you dare to lie to me, you little F-seeker. I know that you're lying. Who the hell do you think you are?" Smiling behind his mask, Jason couldn't help but feel amused before he nonchalantly said, "Oh. I thought it was common sense to start lying if the other side starts the conversation with a big lie too. Otherwise, please explain to me why this girl has the most basic quantum bracelet for orphans." Jason never understood why orphans had to give away their original quantum bracelet only to receive the most basic one, which couldn't even use Access Federation Network to purchase anything or to look at videos on certain streaming platforms like Starstream and so on. Orphans didn't receive good education and combat techniques to learn how to defend themselves either, as long as they resided inside an orphanage. There were more things about orphanages that were rumored to be vicious or unfair for the orphans, but Jason was not sure if they were true. Either way, in his opinion, the girl behind him was interested because it seemed that the emerald green colored crystal in her hand still belonged to her. There had to be something more which Jason just didn't know, but he was curious about it and wanted to figure it out. Hearing the black masked youth's answer, the small group leader's lips twitched before he said, "We have no bad blood between each other and only want to retrieve the girl because she escaped us. Do we have to create a feud with each other over such a small thing? You don't know with whom you're messing with." To Jason, this sounded more like a threat than an offer, which caused him to shrug his shoulder when he said, "I was only on transit and saw something that bothered me about you guys, so I decided to help. As for whom I'm messing with, why should I care? It should be you guys who are afraid to mess with me because you don't know who you're messing with. Creating a feud with me will cause a huge loss, more than losing out on the little girl behind me. That, I can promise." Ending his short announcement to the group of young men, he released his killing intent towards the small group as his cold golden eyes shimmered through the black mask, turning the atmosphere eerie. Gulping down their saliva, the group of men behind their leader became nervous, while the same applied for the canine soulbonds, who could only look at Artemis and Scorpio nervously, knowing that they could die any second if a battle between them would start. Gritting his teeth, the leader knew that the black-masked youth was not someone they could mess with easily, and that Jason's words shouldn't be wrong. At least from the overbearing aura that radiated from him, while the black-masked youth's soulbonds seemed to be a rare race and a powerful one at that too. However, even if they turned around and left without the girl, there was another issue they would have to face that seemed to be similarly problematic to offend the black-masked youth. If we come back to our master without the girl, we will be punished. 2-star notes and she'll belong to you. When Jason heard these words, he didn't know what to say at first before he regained his senses. 2-star notes. Why? Shouldn't she belong to nobody, as a free human? He was completely unaware about what was going on right now and could only look at the leader opposite him with a baffled expression that was fortunately covered by the black mask he was wearing. However, hearing Jason's question, the leader could only laugh out loud before he said, "Free human. If this little girl behind you didn't escape us, she would already be enslaved and not a troublemaker anymore. If you want her, hand over 2-star notes, otherwise, we can only try to take her with force. Bear in mind that if you want to continue living here, paying us will be less troublesome." Enslaved. 2-star notes. If I want to continue living here, paying is less troublesome. What is going on here? Pondering for a moment, a horrifying premonition began to form in his mind, when he realized what the small group leader's words meant. A slave merchant, or maybe even market. This was the most likely answer, and Jason could only shake his head, thinking that Terebrine didn't seem to be nice to orphans as he sighed. He was already aware of their ranking system, but it shocked him that the Jewel family even allowed enslavement. At least that was what Jason comprehended from the leader's words, if you want to continue living here. Maybe it could also be only one city and that he coincidentally entered this particular city where the slave market was situated, but how much of a coincidence would that be? Shaking his head, Jason decided that it might be better to stay low-key and not to kill potential underlings of the B-grade city's slave market that might even have connections throughout Terebrine. As such, he took out 2-star notes, enveloped them in mana, and threw them towards the leader, who smiled slightly at him. However, Jason's next words caused him to frown. "Now that the girl behind me belongs to me, don't even dare to appear in front of her again, otherwise, I'll kill all of you." Turning around towards the girl, he wanted to reassure her that there was not another matter he had to be careful of. "Did anyone force you to sign a soul contract, or did you ever sign one with someone voluntarily?" Emily was still under shock to have witnessed the last few hours that were full of terror because her other peers from the orphanage were forced into signing a soul contract. She could only escape because one of the slave merchants neglected his work, which caused her to end up in the current situation. Shaking her head, Jason noticed that she still shivered, but he didn't know what to do to reassure her that everything was fine, because a calming pat on her shoulder might end up scaring her more than helping out. If she had been violated, this would be even worse, and it was only fortunate that her clothes seemed to be perfectly fine, with the sole exception of them being dirty and smelly. Now that the group of men that pursued the girl received their money, they turned around and disappeared without saying anything else. Nothing special happened which caused Jason to lift his eyebrow because he expected to be blackmailed or something like that. Is it over now? Chapter 307 Planting False Evidence by Hydesgrain. When the men on the canine soul bonds disappeared, Emily's legs gave in as she slumped on the ground without enough energy left to stand up again. She also stopped shivering, which was a good sign, and Jason wanted to help her up. As such, he held out his hand when he suddenly thought that she could be scared of men, which caused him to hesitate for a moment. However, Emily already tried her best to grasp his hand to stand up again, before she began to thank him several dozen times in succession. Thank you. I'm so thankful to you. Thank you very much. Hearing all of this, Jason lifted his hand to indicate to her that she should stop, which she did without hesitation. Well, I don't know how to start, but let me introduce myself first. My name is Jason Lair. Nice to meet you. Taking off his mask, Emily saw his face for the first time, and she could hardly contain her shock because Jason seemed to be not older than she was. How old are you? She subconsciously asked without introducing herself first. However, instead of saying anything at all, Jason just walked inside his small shop, while Artemis adjusted her size to squeeze on his shoulder. Scorpio was forced to enter his soul world, and only Emily was left on the street looking after Jason with confusion before she followed him after a moment. She was still scared about what happened, and it was difficult for her to trust anyone, now that she figured out that others might enslave her and do whatever they wanted to do with her. This thought alone was enough to create a distinct fear within her. However, she still forced herself to follow Jason inside the shop because she owed him a huge favor for rescuing her, and there was nowhere she could go either way. She had no money, family, or anyone to help her, which caused her to sigh deeply as she felt anxious about her future intensified. Entering the small shop, Emily was astonished at how exquisite it looked like, and she only noticed Jason again, when he halted his steps in front of the counter. Increasing her pace, she appeared behind him, only to remember that she didn't introduce herself yet. I forgot to tell you my name, I'm Emily. Jason was still doing something at the counter and Emily could only see his broad back. Before she only saw the side of his face, but when he turned around after he was done with everything, Emily immediately noticed his golden eyes that shimmered brightly. So beautiful, she said subconsciously, which caused Jason to lift his eyebrow as he said with a faint smile on his lips. You often speak without thinking, huh? Under normal circumstances this would be seen as an insult, but hearing these words from Jason, who smiled at her, Emily didn't think that it was meant as an insult. Rather than that, he just looked as if he wanted to know if he was right with his assumption or not. Nodding her head, she didn't say anything else, still embracing the emerald green-colored crystal around her. Seeing this, he also noticed that she stopped shivering completely, even if Emily still seemed to be uncomfortable. As such, Jason just smiled when he asked, if it's not too much to ask, can you explain to me more about the slave market, or what you ran away and how you ended up there? Is that something legal on Terebrine or just a thing here, in this city? Emily was still hesitant, but hearing Jason's words she understood that he was most likely a foreigner who intervened in her trouble, without knowing if her pursuit was entitled or not. This caused her to feel more secure around the youth in front of her because it seemed that he genuinely wanted to help her out of trouble without receiving any benefits, as she couldn't see any lust in his golden eyes, which was different from the other men she was inside the slave market before she fled. I'm not sure about other cities, but the slave market seems to be legal here. The government said that they implemented a new system to punish criminals by enslaving them. However, it is weird that not only murderers and other criminals, but also ordinary citizens and orphans, end up enslaved. According to the orphanage I lived in, everyone with a good enough soul awakening and mana aptitude should be exempt from being enslaved, which leads everyone to absorb mana, as if our life depends on it, which is not necessarily wrong. Emily sighed deeply, and Jason could see pain in her eyes when she continued. Apparently, even if we reach a certain mana core rank until the age of 15, slave merchants will come, take us and enslave us, saying that we are thieves. Even if we retaliated, there is nothing for us to do because the orphanage didn't take all of our belongings away. As you can see, I'm holding an emerald green colored crystal in my hand, and that was the only thing the orphanage left me after taking my family's other belongings. Now, they say that I stole the crystal I received from my parents before they died to turn me into a criminal. Hearing her words, Jason felt disgusted as he summarized everything in his mind. If Emily's words are right, the government knows about the slave market inside the city. I doubt that it's only one city, but it would be better that way. Furthermore, they enslave not only real criminals but also turn innocent orphans and normal citizens into criminals to increase the number of slaves. Why does someone even need slaves? They're even more expensive to purchase than employees cost over several dozen years. Isn't that similar to the Drake family's harsh soul contracts? If someone has even a little bit of talent, they might be worth being purchased and trained into soldiers to build a small army. With this thought, he remembered how much Emily was worth even without an enslavement contract, which indicated that her soul awakening and mana aptitude should be quite high. There was also the possibility that the small group's leader exploited him, but from Jason's perspective that was unlikely because the leader didn't even hesitate to say the price, which was only possible if he knew it beforehand. Maybe he was also quick-witted, however, Jason doubted that. When he thought about the Drake family's way to create his own loyal army, Jason couldn't help but think that it was extremely beneficial for himself, while it was terrifying for his underlings because they were enslaved, which was not a good way to live. However, now that Emily stood in front of him, with the unique emerald green-colored crystal in her hand, he suddenly wanted to build his own faction. This thought was something he never had because he had more than enough things to take care of about himself. But after witnessing how the Drake and now apparently also the Jewel family treated their own citizens, Jason couldn't help but think that it might be a good idea to form a faction to change the tides. Mankind seemed to have more problems than he initially expected, and Jason could only sigh deeply, thinking that it would have been so much better if his vessel was larger and reinforced so that he could become stronger even faster without the need to care about his high soul world amplification and other issues. Jason was furious about how the weaker were treated, and it reminded him about the blood sectaire that killed his mother without any reason. He subconsciously released his killing intent and Emily stepped back in fear, only for Jason to calm down a few moments later. I'm a little bit too easy emotionally triggered in the last few days. He thought, confused about himself. Apologizing, he looked directly into Emily's green eyes, before he asked. You have nowhere to go, right? Do you want to work for me? Chapter 308 Emerald Crystal by Hydesgrain. You want me to work for you? Why? Suspicion filled Emily's mind because they neither knew each other really, nor did she receive any special education except going to middle school. After the mana outbreak, high schools became more important as they taught martial arts skills, and thanks to that, tuition fees also increased manifold. As such, an orphan like her could have never entered even a bad high school without any credits. Even normal citizens had problems procuring enough credits to allow their children to enter a high school. Jason also knew what it meant to be an orphan and could roughly understand her struggles, even if he had it much easier thanks to meeting the Flays, the existence of his mana eyes and multiple more advantageous events. However, exactly because he knew what it meant to be an orphan, he wanted to give Emily a small opportunity to change her future. If he could help to improve someone's life with a few credits, why shouldn't he help? Furthermore, it was not like he wouldn't receive anything from it because Emily would still be his employee, working for her salary. Considering that he demanded a soul contract to prevent betrayals and discriminating behavior to some customers, Jason was sure that he would come out of this deal with more profit while at the same time helping the young girl in front of her. There is no apparent reason. I just need employees and you need to make a living now that you're free. Jason didn't want to bother too much about this and neither expected to get the 2-star notes he spent to purchase Emily back. However, what he didn't expect was that Emily, who seemed to be somewhat naive and innocent, confronted him. "I don't even understand why you spent 2-star notes to help me out before and now you want to employ me instead of making me your slave." These words caused Jason to lift his eyebrow as he asked, "Do you want to be enslaved?" Shaking her head in denial without hesitation after she heard his words, Emily couldn't help but feel conflicted. She didn't want to be enslaved, but in her opinion, she wasn't even worth 1-star notes, which caused her to bit on her lips in frustration. Neither did she possess anything valuable, nor was her education great. Only her soul awakening and mana aptitude were somewhat decent, yet nothing comparable to Terebrian's prodigies. Jason noticed that something was wrong with Emily and thought that her mindset could be somewhat different than his because enslavement was not something far-fetched in the B-grade city they currently resided in. As such, without waiting for Emily to say something, he continued to speak nonchalantly. "I don't know what exactly your issue is, but if you're bothered about the 2-star notes, you should just work hard enough to let me earn more than that. In the end, it was my choice to pay for your freedom, or however you want to call it. Furthermore, I don't want to enslave you. The only thing I want right now is to employ you and sign a normal soul contract with you, without any harsh clauses. As you might be unaware of what you even have to do after I employed you, it's pretty simple. Sell the items in this shop according to the prices I set and take care of the customers. I'll also give you a few handbooks about your occupation, and during the weekend you can memorize everything. Starting from Monday, the Golden Soul shop will open and start selling goods. However, you don't have to give out any special service to anyone, and if someone demands anything like that, just tell them that we have a camera and other more dangerous defensive mechanisms inside the shop." Nodding her head, Emily couldn't help but smile weirdly and feel nervous because she was unable to believe that she was lucky enough to encounter Jason, who sincerely wanted to help her. Jason not only rescued her from the slave merchant's subordinates but also gave her the opportunity to remain free and work as his employee. Seeing that Emily nodded her head, Jason manifested a soul contract made out of a soul thread he led outside his body before he started to write down the clauses he already stated previously. He just wanted to prevent anyone from betraying him, having any bias, discriminating against others, behaving like monkeys, and so on. To put it simple, Jason searched for kind and loyal employees, which however didn't mean that they had to cope with unfriendly customers. This was something he couldn't accept, and rather than trying to retain such customers, Jason would rather lose out on the profit and have a professional and great atmosphere in his shop. Once the contract was done, Emily read through it once as she drew a soul thread out of her soul world. Jason thought that she would sign it immediately, only to see her adding a clause, which was only possible if it didn't demand anything from Party A who set up the soul contract. This confused Jason, but he waited patiently to see what clause she added to the soul contract, only to smile lightly. "I, Emily, will be thankful for everything I received until I die. I will repay everything." Only a moment later, Emily signed the contract before she slumped on the ground, exhausted. To Jason, it looked like she used her soul the first time in her life, which shouldn't have been the case because she could control her soul energy better than others, which was something he didn't expect. However, she also didn't possess an amplification in her mana core size or transmuted mana. Now that everything is done, take these handbooks and read through them. Here are also a few mana stones that you can sell for credits to purchase a new quantum bracelet so that I can transfer your salary to it next time. With the remaining credits, you can look for a small apartment to live in. Handing her a few small books he purchased for himself to learn more about doing business and how to handle a shop, with a few small grade 1 mana stones he didn't use anymore, Emily's eyes gleamed brightly because she never received anything since she was forced to enter the orphanage. Jason was still pondering whether or not he should mind the slave market for now because he had already more than enough enemies to face, and there were even more things he had to take care of to be even eligible to become stronger. Right now, he couldn't even fully utilize his soul world without breaking apart. How should he be able to offend the whole Jewel clan, if their family was behind the slave market? In his opinion, it would be extremely difficult to establish a slave market inside a city without anyone from the government noticing, which was apparently even the other side around, as the government seemed to have established it. This also included that the Jewel clan member, who governed Terebrine, was in this mess. Even if Jason was not a fan of enslavement or anything even remotely close to that, he couldn't just charge ahead and reform several big families only because he wanted to. However, understanding that there are multiple big families who treat their citizens not better than trash and force them into doing things they didn't want to, Jason wondered how the whole situation looked in other islands or even kingdoms on Canir. Not every big clan and family will be like them, probably. Shaking his head to come back out of his train of thoughts, Jason looked at Emily, who already started reading inside a handbook he gave her, as he said, "Don't you want to contract a soul bond? I noticed that you have good control over your soul energy, which means that you practice with it diligently. Knowing this, you should have amassed a lot of soul energy units, even if you might not practice the Heaven's Hell technique. Just by following the crudest principle of soul energy enhancement, by forcefully inserting the soul energy inside the soul world core, for several months should barely allow you to reach your current soul energy control." Averting her gaze from the book to Jason, Emily didn't know what exactly she should say, and she decided to remain simple as she frustratingly said, "I don't have any credits to purchase a soul bond as an orphan." Hearing this, he could only smile before he said, "And what about the emerald crystal, or rather egg, in your hand?" Chapter 309 Did You Make Trouble Again? By Hydesgrain. Jason was unsure if he would have rescued Emily under normal circumstances only to satiate his marginal sense of justice. At least not as long as he didn't know who he might offend, which could bring huge problems. However, there was another reason for him to rescue her. Not only did he need an employee, but with what he saw, the thought of forming a faction that only appeared in his mind several minutes ago increased manifold. The emerald green-colored crystal in Emily's hand, which she seemed to have received from her parents before they died, harbored a beast. Jason was unsure why the beast inside didn't hatch, and at the same time why nobody noticed that the emerald crystal was not what it seemed to be. It was an egg instead of a normal crystal. Hearing this, Emily was astonished as her eyes widened as she looked at the emerald-colored crystal in her hand. "What do you mean by that? How can that be an egg? The orphanage deemed it useless and didn't take it from me because of that. Furthermore, I have had this crystal since I was little. How could it not have hatched until now if it were to be an egg?" Without wanting to say too much about his mana eyes, Jason just tried to convince her one more time before he would let it go. Forcing someone was not something he wanted to do, even less with someone he wanted to work for him and maybe even to establish a faction with. If you have a wind affinity, soul energy units in the 4-digit range, if possible not in the lower 4-digit range, and enough space for a soul bond, you might as well try it out. There is no harm in trying, right? Smiling at her, Jason tried to encourage her, because this choice might change her whole future. If Emily would bind the beast inside the emerald-colored egg, it was possible for her to become strong as long as she received enough resources to absorb mana and break through her current shackles with her new soul bond. Through his mana eyes, he perceived a strong and distinct purple color, which meant that the unhatched beast had the potential of a strong Guardian-ranked beast. This meant if she contracted the Guardian-ranked beast at her current mana core rank that was at the first expert rank, her strength would increase a lot. To be able to reach the first expert rank at the age of 15 without cultivation resources indicated to Jason that Emily was ambitious, diligent, and someone with talent. She might have absorbed mana over the whole day because she didn't have to refine her soul energy for several hours like he had to, or practice any martial art techniques as she didn't possess any, but by nurturing her, Emily was bound to become strong if she didn't give up. Hearing Jason's words, she began to ask herself if there was even a reason not to try out what he said. She always felt that the emerald crystal from her parents was something special but was only to get the hang of it. Jason's calm attitude and confidence showed her that he knew something she was unaware of, and instead of hesitating as she did since becoming an orphan, Emily gathered all her courage, inhaled deeply before she cut her finger with a dagger Jason handed her. Loosening up a thread from her soul, Emily led it through her arm to the cut finger, which she held on top of the emerald green-colored egg that was placed in her other hand. Once the soul thread enveloped the egg completely, Emily shrieked out and a joyous expression formed on her face, telling Jason that she finally figured out what the emerald crystal really was. Only 2 minutes passed until the soul connection was established and the emerald-colored egg vanished inside her soul through the magic circle that manifested below it. However, what happened afterward caused Jason to frown because Emily lost consciousness before she started to sweat heavily. Rushing towards her, he felt a searing heat from her as he asked himself, "Was that too much from me?" First the soul contract and now a guardian-ranked egg as first soul bond. Scratching the back of his head, Jason decides that it might be better to consult Dahlia about it. "She won't have the same issue as I have with my vessel, right?" Slapping his forehead, he could only curse inwardly because he was once again too impatient. Artemis, who sat on his shoulder, screeched out when Jason carried Emily out of the shop, which he locked, before doing anything else. It was only Friday and there was more than enough time for him to contract another employee until Monday, when he wanted to open the shop for everyone. However, right now, Artemis seemed to be annoyed by Jason's request because he asked her to let him and Emily fly on her. She rejected this request almost immediately, and when he asked Artemis to enter his mana core to manifest her wings on his back, she rejected it once again. Frowning deeply, Jason was not sure what his soul bond wanted, and he didn't have any time to waste because Emily's current situation was not something he could neither determine nor heal, as a normal recuperation potion seemed to be useless. In the end, he could barely force Artemis to enlarge and grasp his shoulders with her talons to bring him to his master's house in a few minutes. It was a vast difference to use shuttles or a soul bond as a means to transport someone because the pathway for soul bonds had many shortcuts, and it was even better for flying beasts. Jason could also use his fortified soul conjunction everywhere as long as he wore a mask, because it would be hard to determine his age while he wears a mask. His voice was the only clear indicator to tell others that he was still a youth and not even in his 20s. Once Artemis carefully descended in front of their house, Jason sprinted towards the door with Emily in his arms. Rushing inside, he carefully placed Emily on the couch before he started to call for Dahlia several times. However, before Dahlia appeared, Shane already stood next to him, and Jason could clearly see his master's frown when he saw a young, unconscious girl laying on the couch. "What is this girl doing here?" he asked, barely averting his gaze to Jason, who could only smile innocently, when they heard Dahlia arriving behind them. "Jason, what trouble did you make again?" Upon seeing a heavy sweating girl laying on the couch, Dahlia pushed away Shane and Jason to take a closer look, as she looked at Jason in confusion. "She is extremely weak, exhausted, and has overtaxed her soul. Didn't you go to the shop? How did you meet her?" There was no need to omit anything, and Jason explained everything clearly. Upon hearing what happened to Emily and how Jason behaved, both Dahlia and Shane couldn't help but smile at Jason's action, even if his reason to save her in the first place was not exactly why they were proud of him. However, getting to know that there was a slave market inside the B-grade city they lived in, which might even be supported by the Jewel clan, Shane and Dahlia couldn't help but frown. Under normal circumstances, the Jewel clan would never retort to enslaving others. Their system to grade people might be wrong, but that doesn't mean they enslave others. "Did something change while we were hiding?" Shane said, not knowing what was going on, and both he and Dahlia hadn't heard about the slave market before, because they didn't go out needlessly. Instead, they prepared everything for Jason's arrival after they fled to Terebrine. Before that, they hid on Asterix for several decades and didn't actively try to figure out news from other islands or Canir. Rather than trying to figure out more information about other islands, they tried to stay alive by all means and look out for potential prodigies which allowed them to encounter Jason. However, it looked like many things changed in these decades because both Shane and Dahlia were in the opinion that a slave market didn't exist on Terebrine before. Chapter 310 Stay by Hydesgrain. While Dahlia summoned her two Dryad soulbonds who started to tend Emily and ease the pain caused by her soul overutilization, Shane and Jason started to discuss the main issues that came with the slave market. I don't really care about criminals and it doesn't even matter if they die, but to frame innocent citizens and orphans is definitely wrong. With this, we can also say for sure that their reason to enslave others is not only to create a replaceable workforce but probably also to oppress normal citizens and orphans with the slightest potential, turning them into their combat force. At least that's what I assume. On the other hand, it might also be possible that beautiful women, girls, or handsome men and youths will be enslaved and turned into slaves to satiate the more prosperous nobles' and merchants' desires. Shane didn't need a long time to summarize everything as simple as it was before he started to summarize the Jewel Clan's possible gains from the slave market. Not only will everyone with a high potential that crossed a certain threshold be enslaved with the possible reason to build an army, but because nobody with talent is able to retaliate, there won't be a riot against the slave market either. If someone dares to start a rebellion, they might even be killed if they can't defend themselves against someone stronger than them. Furthermore, through the profits that come from selling slaves for whatever reason, the Jewel Clan is able to acquire more cultivation resources for the descendants, which allows them to become stronger in a shorter period than others. Once Shane finished, Jason could only sigh deeply as he mumbled. Why is everyone so fixated on enslaving others? When Shane heard this, he could only sigh and explain it to his disciple, even if he was sure that Jason was already aware of the reason. Enslaving someone prevents needless trouble and fear of being betrayed, creates huge profits and can even be used to force someone to do things they wouldn't do under normal circumstances. Once you're forced into submission, the only way to dissolve a soul contract is the superior contractor's death. At least under the assumption that the soul contract doesn't state that you have to stay loyal and submissive to a whole family or clan, which is, for example, the case in the Drake clan's soul contract. In that case, the whole clan has to be annihilated to forcefully nullify the soul contract. Nodding his head, Jason could tell that a soul contract made everything easier because he also used a soul contract for Emily. However, his soul contract was completely different and only demanded her to stay loyal to the Golden Soul Shop and to remain kind to customers. There was nothing excessively cruel or anything like that, while he can't even change anything inside the soul contract if Emily prevents him from doing so because he didn't label himself as superior in the contract. The only thing he clearly stated was that Emily was his employee, but that was it. Sighing deeply, he averted his gaze to Artemis, whom he caressed, only for Scorpio with his large body to demand caresses too. Fortunately, their living room was large enough for Scorpio to be summoned, otherwise, there would be a hellfire of curses inside his mind, stating that he favors Artemis. This would be extremely bad, and Jason continued to caress his two soul bonds that were extremely clingy and indigent as he saw that Dahlia helped up Emily, who could barely open her eyes. After regaining her consciousness, Emily found herself in a foreign room, before a blonde-haired middle-aged woman stared at her, and the only thing she heard was a sigh of relief from that woman. Forcing herself to sit up, she looked through the room, where she saw Jason talking with a middle-aged man with black hair and his two soul bonds extremely close to him, quarreling with each other about Jason's attention. Seeing that Emily was awake, Jason wanted to stand up, only for Artemis and Scorpio to restrain him, which caused him to frown. "Hello. Let me move, please." Trying to use force, Jason could only lament that his soul bonds were stronger than him, by several levels at that. Being forced to remain seated, he told Emily reassuringly. "Emily, it's good that you're conscious again. You don't have to be afraid of anyone here. Just tell us if anything hurts. Dahlia might be able to help you." Smiling dryly, Emily was overwhelmed with her current situation as she noticed two dryads standing next to her, using their healing ability to soothe the pain inside her. After taking a few deep breaths, she was able to calm down as she began to understand what happened. "Did you bring me here because I fainted?" she hesitantly asked, unsure if she misunderstood anything wrong or if Jason was really worried about her well-being, only to see him nodding his head. "Yeah. I didn't know what was going on with you and thought that bringing you to my home would be the best solution. I couldn't just leave someone unconscious in my shop, right?" Trying to ease the tension inside the living room, Jason added the last sentence, which was however not the best decision as he noticed Dahlia's glaring gaze. However, Emily didn't even notice that and smiled lightly, mumbling, "Thank you." Hearing how sincerely she thanked Jason for doing what he was supposed to do after burdening her with a soul contract and then convincing her to contract a soul bond at the Guardian rank, Dahlia couldn't help but embrace Emily, who was taken by surprise. Jason and Shane were also astonished about Dahlia's sudden behavior, but thinking that Emily was an orphan who didn't receive much love in her childhood after her parents passed away, they could somehow understand why Dahlia acted like that. Emily was unsure what to do and only sat on the couch stiffly as she looked outside the window only to see that it was already sunset. Trying to leave Dahlia's embrace, she suddenly stood up with trembling legs and hurriedly said, "The shops will close soon, I have to go, otherwise, I can't exchange the mana stones with credits and look for a place to sleep." Without looking back, she wanted to rush outside the house, when Shane suddenly said, "Do you even have enough credits for a shuttle, or do you want to run for several hours only to find out that the shops are already closed?" Hearing this, Emily halted in her tracks and one could visibly see how her mind tried to figure out a solution for her issue to find a sleeping place as Dahlia said, "She can stay here." "Huh? Stay here or sleep here for today?" Shane almost immediately blurted out without caring that Emily, who they were talking about, was only a few meters away from them, trembling when she heard Shane's words. "Staying, of course. Her first soul bond is a Guardian-ranked beast, and if she were to have a high soul world amplification, Jason would have killed her someone, when he convinced her to form a soul bond contract with such a soul bond. Or have you forgotten that Jason's situation is already problematic with two unblemished beasts as soul bonds? If you don't want to take your disciples' responsibility, I will take it." Turning around with an HMPF, Jason could only hear her faintly mumbling, "Furthermore, she is cute." It was certainly true that he convinced her into forming a soul bond, but it was not like he forced her, and Jason thought that Dahlia only said this as a reason to let Emily stay with them. Whether it was pity because Emily was an orphan, motherly feelings as a mother, or something else didn't seem to matter to Dahlia, who approached Emily, who still trembled from Shane's words, to console her. Patting Shane's shoulder, Jason only said, "Good luck," before he stood up, using force to push away Scorpio's large head, to look into Emily's teary eyes as he said, "If you don't want to stay here, nobody will force you, but you should at least sleep here for today. You can change your quantum bracelet tomorrow so I can transfer you credits. However, if you decide to stay here, let me just tell you that this decision could be one of the best or the worst choices you might ever take in your whole life, changing your whole future."